Halacha Yomi. We're up to page 373. Melacha number 8. Tochen. Grinding. Tochen refers to the process of grinding the grains in order to make flour. So some say they grind the flour. Some say they grind the herbs. The point is crushing the seed in order to make flour. Now, number 1. Tochen includes breaking down and reducing an item into small parts, so now you can use it for something else. Number 2. It applies to edible items like vegetables, fruits, grain, peppercorn, spices, coffee beans, and all these other things, and non-edible items as well, like rocks, wood, and metal. So, if you go and take, let's say, those pepper grinders, right, on Shabbat, that's tochen, that's grinding, it's a sur. Or let's say you have, you want to grind coffee beans on Shabbat, it's a sur, it's all grinding. We're going to learn even chopping up tomatoes and cucumbers very finely on Shabbat is also a sur. Only certain conditions it's permitted. We're going to see.
Big pieces.
Right. So number 3, in order to transgress melachav tochen, it doesn't have to be you made it into a powder. Even into making it, chopping wood into wood chips, crushing rocks into gravel, right? All these things are making into smaller pieces, not even just a powder, is asur. 4, it is not permitted to chop vegetables on Shabbat very finely in order to use them later in the day. It is only permitted to do for yourself or for others a little bit before, short time before one eats the meal. Similar to borer. Borer, we said it has to be within half hour. So then tochen will be the same thing. So if you want to make an Israeli salad, you have to chop it up right before the meal. You cannot do it earlier in the day. As number 5. I'm sorry, finishing number 4. Even so, it is praiseworthy to be stringent to chop the vegetable a little bit larger than normal, even when making them immediately before the meal, in order to fulfill more opinions. Okay, there's a little bit of an argument between Rishonim of does it apply by vegetables or not. Some say it only applies by vegetables that are not edible raw. Some say it doesn't apply to vegetables whatsoever, right? Or if you only have intention of cooking them. But at the end of the day, we're machmir, we're strict for the Rishonim who say it applies by even edible raw vegetables. Therefore, a person should not do it unless he's doing it to eat right away. Why does it help it to eat right away? Because what is the melacha of grinding? They ground up the seeds in order to make flour for later. But if I'm doing it for now to eat, that's not similar to what they did in the Mishkan. Number 5. So we said before, it's permitted to finely chop vegetables. This can be done before the beginning of the meal, even though you only eat it many hours later into the meal. But it has to be done right before the meal. Therefore, one should not begin to finely chop the vegetables on Shabbat before the time that the prayers in the synagogue are over. If you need more time than that, up to half an hour. 6. Someone who accidentally finely chopped vegetables more than half an hour before the meal, or he did more than he was supposed to, meaning he did more than one needed. He needed a certain amount, and he did double that by accident. So he's allowed to use them. It's fine. He can use it at the meal, and it's not a problem. Similarly, if one chopped vegetables an hour or 2 hours before the meal, he also is allowed to eat the vegetables of the meal, even though he shouldn't have done so from the beginning. Why? Because there's a mahloket if this is allowed or not. Anytime there's a mahloket if something's allowed or not, there's no problem of eating it afterwards. Number 7, even when chopping a vegetable for immediate use, one may not use a utensil specifically used for chopping, like a tzorka, a grater, or a slicing contraption, right? They have a slicer like this, a mandolin they call it, right? You cannot use that on Shabbat. You have to use a regular knife. Similarly, one may not use a utensil that's specifically used for mashing a food. Rather, you have to use the back of the fork. I guess they have these things that you could mash the garlic, or you could, it's a masher tool, right? You have to use the back of a fork. You're allowed to chop vegetables on a tachteche, on a cutting board. That's allowed. Number 9, mashing. It is permitted to mash dates and nuts for a child, elderly person, or someone who's sick and difficult to chew his food. However, the mashing should be done with shinui, in an unusual way that's not usually done during the week. Mashing is also tochen, so therefore it's not really permitted unless it's for these sick people. Number 10, one may mash a banana or a cooked vegetable for a child immediately before feeding him, as long as you don't use a utensil that is normally used for mashing. Similarly, you could spread banana or avocado on a piece of bread, and maybe right before you eat it. So that's a smoothing, right? Smearing the avocado is also crushing it. So therefore, you have to do it immediately before you eat. There are some leniencies when it comes to crushing. For example, 11, Tochen does not apply to something that was already ground up before. Okay, so therefore, let's say crushing a cookie. Cookie was dough that got crushed up before, so therefore it's not, or cake, right? Making it into crumbs is not a problem. It's not Tochen. Let's say crushing a tablet of medicine into powder that was already crushed before, or crushing a sugar cube, clumps of sugar, right? Let's say you have sometimes the sugar gets clumpy and you want to break it apart. That's not Tochen. That's not considered grinding, right? So therefore, all these things, because they're crushed before, so then it'll be permitted. So let's say you have a peppercorn or a block of salt, right? A chunk of salt that you want to crush. So how do I crush it? I can't crush it in a regular way with a regular instrument, regular tool. So you see, you have to use two shinuim. What's a two shinui? One shinui is you have to crush it with the back, with the blade of a knife, and within a bowl, and a plate that you don't usually use for crushing. Back in the day, what they used to use a mortar and a pestle. They used to have this bowl with this thick rod, and they used to go like this to crush things. So the two shinuyim is, you have to change this, and you have to change this. You have to use a bowl or a plate that you don't usually use for crushing, and you have to use the back of the knife or the blade of the knife to crush. You can't use this mortar thing. You can't crush it with that piece, with that tool. Number 15, it is permitted to chop cooked meat or cheese with a knife into very small pieces. Let's say you make rizigi, right? You go and chop the meat very, very, very small. That's allowed on Shabbat. It's not a problem of grinding of Tochen. It doesn't. This is permitted because Tochen does not apply to an item that does not grow from the ground. You're allowed to use the egg slicer. Let's say a person has an egg, he wants to slice it. You're allowed to use an egg slicer on Shabbat. You're allowed to crumble bread to feed your chickens on Shabbat, or your bird or your fish, even if they won't eat it right away, because bread is already grounded up from before. Okay, we'll stop over here. Amen.